The crystal walls of the Valerian Palace stretched high above the Great Hall, where delegates from across the galaxy had gathered. Light danced through the translucent structure, casting rainbow patterns on the polished floor, where beings from dozens of worlds stood in small groups, their conversations creating a low hum that echoed through the vast space. Princess Lyra moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her silver dress flowing behind her as she observed the various species that had come to attend the summit. She paused near a group of tall, blue-skinned diplomats from the Centauri Republic, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in rhythm with their speech. Their translator devices hummed softly as they discussed trade routes and mining rights. Not far from them, a cluster of insectoid delegates from the hive worlds clicked and buzzed, their compound eyes reflecting the palace lights as they shared data through direct neural links. The princess had attended many such gatherings, but this one felt different. The recent attacks on merchant vessels along the Outer Rim had everyone on edge, and territorial disputes were becoming more frequent. Her father, Emperor Vex, had called this summit hoping to find peaceful solutions before conflicts escalated into something worse. As she made her way across the hall, Princess Lyra noticed a group that stood apart from the others. The human delegation was small, just 5 individuals clustered near one of the massive pillars. She had heard about humans, of course, but had never seen them up close. They were a relatively new species to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only a few decades ago. What struck her immediately was how primitive they looked compared to the other delegates. While most species wore clothing embedded with microcomputers and energy field generators, the humans dressed in simple dark suits. Where others carried advanced communication devices that projected holographic displays, the humans used basic handheld units that looked almost crude by galactic standards. But it was a human standing guard that truly caught her attention. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing what appeared to be some kind of battle armor. The suit looked ancient, its metal surface scarred and dented from countless battles. The design seemed almost medieval, with overlapping plates and joint covers that belonged in a museum rather than on a diplomatic mission. Scratches and burn marks covered nearly every surface, and in several places, the metal had been patched with what looked like completely different materials. Princess Lyra found herself staring at the armored human. His helmet covered most of his face, but she could see his eyes through the visor, constantly scanning the crowd with the kind of alertness she associated with professional soldiers. The armor made soft mechanical sounds when he moved, suggesting some kind of internal systems. But even those sounded outdated compared to the silent, seamless technology other species used. She moved closer to her advisor, Ambassador Thane, who was reviewing diplomatic protocols on his tablet. The elderly Valerian had served her father for decades and had vast experience with interspecies relations. "Tell me about the humans," she said quietly, nodding toward their delegation. Thane followed her gaze and smiled slightly. "Ah, yes, the newcomers. Fascinating species, really. They achieved space travel much later than most civilizations, and their technology is still quite behind ours. But they are surprisingly adaptable. Their guard looks like he stepped out of our ancient history museums," Princess Lyra observed. "That armor cannot possibly be effective against modern weapons." "I believe they call it traditional military dress," Thane replied. "Many species maintain ceremonial uniforms for formal occasions, though I admit theirs does look rather worn." The princess watched as the armored human shifted his position slightly, his head turning to track a group of delegates who had moved too close to human ambassador. The movement was fluid despite the bulky appearance of his suit, but she could hear the mechanical whirring of servos and gyroscopes compensating for the weight. "It is almost embarrassing," she said, loud enough that several nearby delegates turned to look. "We are discussing the future of galactic civilization, and they send someone wearing scrap metal." A few of the other aliens chuckled at her comment. The Centauri delegates paused their conversation to glance over the humans, their luminescent patterns shifting to colors that indicated amusement. Even some of the insectoid representatives seemed to take notice, their antennae twitching in what their species used to express humor. The human ambassador, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, seemed to hear the comment but showed no reaction. She continued her conversation with a delegate from the Rigel system as if nothing had happened. The armored guard also gave no sign that he had heard, but Princess Lyra noticed that his visor turned in her direction for just a moment before returning to surveillance of the crowd. "Perhaps we should focus on the proceedings," Ambassador Thane suggested gently. "The formal sessions begin soon." Princess Lyra nodded but continued to observe the humans. Their delegation seemed so out of place among the advanced civilizations represented in the hall. The Altarians had energy shields that created barely visible distortions in the air around them. The Vegan Confederacy representatives wore biosuits that could adapt to any environment and heal minor wounds automatically. Even the usually conservative Rigelians had upgraded armor that could shift between solid and energy states depending on the threat. And then there were the humans, with their ancient-looking metal suit and basic equipment. As the delegates began moving toward the main conference chamber, Princess Lyra found herself walking near the human group. She could hear them speaking in their native language, which their translators converted to Standard Galactic. Their conversation was professional and focused, discussing security protocols and diplomatic objectives. The armored guard, whom she heard them call Marcus, spoke in short, precise sentences when he contributed to the discussion. The main chamber was even more impressive than the Great Hall, with a circular arrangement of seats that could accommodate the various physical needs of different species. The lighting could be adjusted for different visual spectrums, and the atmosphere was carefully controlled to be comfortable for all attendees. At the center stood a holographic projector that would display star maps, trade routes, and other relevant information during the discussions. Princess Lyra took her place in the Valerian section, which was positioned prominently near the front due to her empire's influence in galactic affairs. From there, she had a good view of all the other delegations. The humans were seated in a smaller section designated for newer member species, along with 3 other civilizations that had joined the galactic community within the last century. As the session began, various speakers addressed the assembly about recent developments in different sectors of the galaxy. Trade disputes, territorial claims, and resource allocation were all discussed in the careful diplomatic language that characterized such gatherings. Princess Lyra participated when issues affecting Valerian interests arose, but found herself repeatedly distracted by the human delegation. The armored guard, Marcus, remained standing throughout the proceedings. His position gave him a clear view of the entire chamber, and his head moved in regular patterns as he maintained his watch. The armor creaked softly whenever he shifted his weight, and she could see small indicator lights blinking on various parts of the suit. Whatever technology it contained was clearly functional, but it seemed so crude compared to the subtle, elegant systems other species used. During a break in proceedings, she overheard 2 delegates from the Procyon Alliance discussing the humans in hushed tones. "I heard their home world was nearly destroyed in some kind of global conflict before they achieved spaceflight," one of them said. "Perhaps that explains their attachment to such primitive military equipment. It makes one wonder how they survived long enough to develop interstellar technology," the other replied. "Though I suppose even primitive tools can be effective if used correctly." Princess Lyra smiled at their comments. She had been thinking something similar herself. Humanity seemed to be clinging to outdated concepts of warfare and defense, while the rest of the galaxy had moved on to more sophisticated approaches. It was almost quaint, in a way, like a child insisting on carrying a wooden sword, while everyone else used energy weapons. The session resumed, and the discussion turned to the recent attacks on shipping lanes. Several species reported losses, and there was growing concern about the identity and motives of the attackers. Security footage from the attacked vessels showed advanced technology and coordinated tactics, suggesting a well-organized and well-funded operation. "The attackers seem to have detailed knowledge of our defensive systems," reported the Centauri ambassador. "They knew exactly how to disable our energy shields and communication arrays." Similar reports came from other species. The attackers had demonstrated familiarity with various technologies and defensive measures used throughout the galaxy. This suggested either insider knowledge or extensive intelligence gathering. When the human ambassador was asked about their experiences, she stood and addressed the assembly in a calm, measured voice. "Humanity has been fortunate to avoid direct attacks so far," she said. "However, we have increased security measures on all our vessels and facilities. We stand ready to assist other species in improving their defensive capabilities if requested." There were a few polite nods from the assembly, But Princess Lyra noticed several delegates exchanging glances that suggested they doubted humans could offer much help in matters of advanced security. After all, if their military technology was represented by the armored guard standing behind their ambassador, what could they possibly teach more advanced civilizations? The formal session continued for several more hours, with various committees being formed to address specific issues. Princess Lyra found herself appointed to the Security Council, which would be responsible for coordinating response to the recent attacks. The human ambassador was also selected for this committee, much to the subtle disappointment of some other delegates. As the day's proceedings concluded and delegates began to disperse, Princess Lyra noticed that the human guard maintained his vigilant posture until the very end. Even as other security personnel relaxed and began socializing, Marcus continued his careful observation of the crowd. His ancient armor clinked softly as he moved, a sound that seemed almost musical compared to the silent efficiency of more advanced protective systems. The princess gathered her things and prepared to leave, but something made her glance back at the human delegation one more time. Marcus was helping to coordinate the movement of his group toward the exit, his bulky armor making him look awkward compared to the graceful movements of other species security personnel. She shook her head slightly, wondering how such a primitive species had managed to survive long enough to join the galactic community. She had no way of knowing that before the summit ended. She would discover just how wrong her assumptions about humanity really were. The second day of the summit began with promise, as delegates gathered in smaller committee rooms to discuss specific issues in more detail. Princess Lyra made her way to the Security Council meeting, her mind focused on the reports of increasing attacks along the trade routes. The morning sunlight streamed through the crystal walls, casting colorful patterns across the corridors as she walked. She arrived at the designated conference room to find most of the other committee members already present. The Centauri representative was reviewing holographic displays showing attack patterns, while delegates from several other worlds studied damage reports and security footage. The human ambassador sat quietly at the far end of the table, her primitive-looking tablet displaying simple text documents rather than the advanced three-dimensional data presentations the others used. Marcus stood near the wall behind the human delegation, his scarred armor catching the light filtering through the crystal ceiling. Princess Lyra noticed that several other delegates glanced at him with barely concealed amusement. His presence seemed almost comical in a room filled with beings who had access to the most advanced technology in the galaxy. The meeting proceeded with each species sharing intelligence about the attacks. The picture that emerged was troubling. The attackers possessed sophisticated knowledge of galactic shipping schedules, defensive systems, and even diplomatic communications. They struck with precision and disappeared before any response could be organized. The level of coordination suggests a large organization, observed the Ridiculed ambassador, his scale features reflecting concern. These are not random pirates or desperate refugees. This is military-grade planning and execution. Princess Lyra nodded in agreement. Our analysis indicates they have access to advanced stealth technology and weapon systems that can penetrate standard defensive shields. Several of our merchant vessels were destroyed before they could even send distress signals. The discussion continued for over an hour, with each delegate contributing what information their governments had gathered. The human ambassador listened carefully but said little, occasionally making notes on her simple device. When finally asked for humanity's assessment, she spoke in the same measured tone she had used the previous day. Our ships have observed unusual energy signatures in several sectors, she said. We believe the attackers are using some form of adaptive technology that can modify itself based on the defensive systems it encounters. This would explain why they seem to know how to counter each species' protection methods. The other delegates nodded politely, but Princess Lyra could see skepticism in their expressions. How could a species with such primitive technology offer meaningful insights into advanced military tactics? She was about to voice this question when alarms began blaring throughout the palace. The sound was deafening, echoing through the crystal corridors with an urgency that made everyone in the room freeze. Red lights began flashing, and automated voices started announcing emergency protocols in multiple languages. Through the transparent walls, Princess Lyra could see security personnel running through the corridors, their weapons drawn and energy shields activated. All delegates must remain in secure locations, the announcement repeated. This is not a drill. Hostile forces have breached the palace perimeter. The delegates in the conference room looked at each other with growing alarm. The Centauri representative attempted to contact a security detail, but his communication device showed only static. Other committee members tried their own equipment with similar results. Whatever was happening had disrupted most of their advanced systems. Marcus moved away from the wall and approached the room's main door. His armor made soft mechanical sounds as he walked, and Princess Lyra noticed that small indicator lights on his suit were blinking in different patterns than before. He placed his armored hand against the door's control panel and paused, apparently listening to something the others could not hear. "We need to move," he said, his voice carrying clearly through his helmet speakers. "This location is not secure." Before anyone could respond, the lights in the corridor outside went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in a dim red glow that made the crystal walls look like they were filled with blood. Through the transparent barrier, they could see figures moving in the distance, armed beings advancing through the palace with military precision. The attackers wore dark armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their weapons glowed with an ominous energy, and they moved in coordinated formations that spoke of professional training. As they advanced, they systematically destroyed security cameras and communication relays, cutting off the palace's ability to coordinate a response. "Keth Collective," whispered the Rigellian delegate, his voice filled with fear. "I recognize their armor design." Princess Lyra felt her stomach drop. The Keth Collective was a militant organization that had been growing in power along the galaxy's outer rim. They were known for their advanced technology and ruthless tactics. If they had come here, it was not for negotiation. Marcus was already moving, checking the room's other exits and examining the walls. His archaic armor clinked and whirred as he worked, but his movements were swift and purposeful. He activated something on his wrist, and a small holographic display appeared. Crude by galactic standards, but apparently functional despite the communication disruption affecting everyone else's equipment. "The main corridors are compromised," he reported. "We need to use the service passages." "How do you know about service passages?" Princess Lyra asked, surprised that a foreign delegate would have such detailed knowledge of the palace layout. "Standard security preparation," Marcus replied simply. "My job is to keep people alive." The sound of energy weapons firing echoed through the corridors, growing closer. Through the crystal walls, they could see Keth's soldiers methodically advancing, their dark forms moving like shadows through the red-lit passages. Several palace guards tried to stop them, but their energy shields flickered and failed under the sustained assault from the attackers' weapons. Marcus opened a maintenance panel that Princess Lyra had not even noticed, revealing a narrow passage that ran parallel to the main corridor. "This way," he said, gesturing for the delegates to follow. "Stay close and stay quiet." The group filed into the service passage, with Marcus leading and the other delegates following in single file. Princess Lyra found herself directly behind the armored human, close enough to hear the soft hum of his suit systems and see the battle damage that covered every surface of his armor. Up close, she could make out repairs that had been made with different materials, suggesting this equipment had seen extensive use. They moved through the narrow passage in tense silence, the sounds of battle growing louder around them. Occasionally, Marcus would stop and listen, apparently using sensors in his armor to track the movements of both the attackers and any remaining palace security. His equipment might look primitive, but it seemed to be working when everyone else's advanced systems had failed. "How is your communication still functioning?" the Centauri delegate whispered as they paused an intersection in the service tunnels. "Different frequency bands," Marcus replied. "Lower tech, harder to disrupt." They continued to the maze of maintenance passages, with Marcus navigating as if he had studied the palace blueprints for weeks. Princess Lyra began to wonder just how much preparation the human delegation had done for this summit. Their security measures seemed far more thorough than she had initially realized. The group reached a junction where several passages met, and Marcus held up his hand for them to stop. Through the thin walls, they could hear Keth's soldiers searching nearby rooms, their harsh voices coordinating the hunt for delegates. Energy weapons discharged repeatedly, suggesting they were destroying everything in their path rather than simply searching. "They are not taking prisoners," the Rigellian whispered, his scales shifting color with fear. Marcus activated his wrist display again, studying what appeared to be a three-dimensional map of the palace. The crude hologram showed moving dots representing various groups throughout the building, with red markers indicating hostile forces and blue ones showing remaining security personnel. The attackers had superior numbers and seemed to be systematically eliminating resistance. "The main security center has fallen," he reported quietly. "Palace guard are falling back to secondary positions, but they are being overwhelmed." Princess Lyra watched the primitive display with growing amazement. Somehow, this simple human equipment was providing better tactical information than the advanced systems her own people used. While their sophisticated networks had been compromised or destroyed, his basic technology continued to function. A new sound echoed through the passages, the distinctive whine of heavy weapons charging. Through gaps in the wall panels, they could see bright flashes as the attackers brought more powerful equipment to bear against the palace's remaining defenses. The crystal structure itself began to vibrate under the assault. "They are using building breaker weapons," Marcus observed, studying his display. "This structure will not survive a prolonged attack." The reality of their situation was becoming clear. The Keth Collective had not come simply to disrupt the summit. They intended to destroy it completely, along with everyone inside. The delegates huddled in the service passage represented some of the most important political figures in the galaxy, and their deaths would create chaos that could lead to system-wide conflicts. Marcus made a decision. He began removing equipment from various points on his armor, revealing an array of devices and weapons that had been integrated into the suit's design. What had looked like random battle damage now revealed itself as carefully concealed storage compartments and mounting points. His primitive armor was apparently far more sophisticated than it appeared. "I am going to clear a path to the emergency evacuation point," he said, checking the weapons he had retrieved. "Stay in this passage and follow it to the third junction, then turn left. There is a reinforced shelter approximately 200 meters from there." "You cannot face them alone," Princess Lyra protested. "They have superior numbers and advanced weapons." Marcus turned to look at her through his helmet's visor. For the first time, she could clearly see his eyes, calm, determined, and completely without fear. "Ma'am, with respect, you do not understand what you are looking at." Before anyone could respond, he activated something on his armor that caused the indicator lights to change from blue to amber. The mechanical sound from his suit shifted to a different pattern, and she could hear what sounded like systems coming online. Marcus checked his weapons one final time and moved toward the passage exit. "Give me 60 seconds after the shooting stops, then move to the shelter," he instructed. "Do not stop for anything." He disappeared through the opening, leaving the delegates alone in the narrow passage. Almost immediately, they heard the sound of combat erupting in the corridor beyond, but not the kind of fighting they had heard before. This was different, more intense, with energy weapons discharging in rapid succession, followed by sounds they could not identify. Princess Lyra pressed her face against a gap in the wall panels, trying to see what was happening. What she saw would stay with her for the rest of her life, and would forever change how she thought about humanity and their place in the galaxy. Princess Lyra pressed her eye closer to the gap in the wall panel, trying to understand what she was seeing in the corridor beyond. The emergency lighting cast everything in deep red shadows, making it difficult to distinguish details, but the sounds of combat had changed completely from what they had heard before. Instead of the organized advance of the Keth soldiers, there was chaos. She could see flashes of energy weapons firing, but not in the coordinated patterns the attackers had used earlier. These were desperate, random shots, as if the soldiers were firing at something they could not properly target. Between the flashes, she caught glimpses of Marcus moving through the corridor, but his movements were unlike anything she had ever seen before. The armored human was no longer the slow, clanking guard she had observed at the diplomatic gathering. He moved with fluid precision, each step calculated and purposeful. His ancient-looking armor, which had seemed so bulky and awkward in the conference rooms, now appeared to flow with his movements as if it were part of his body rather than something worn over it. A Keth soldier appeared in her limited field of view, his dark armor gleaming under the emergency lights. He raised his energy rifle towards something she could not see and fired. The bright beam illuminated the corridor for a moment, but instead of the expected sound of impact, she heard metal ringing against metal. The soldier stumbled backward, apparently struck by something, and fell out of her sight. More soldiers moved into view, their weapons tracking back and forth as they searched for their target. One of them spoke into his communication device in the harsh language of the Keth Collective, his voice carrying panic that seemed completely out of character for the disciplined military force that had breached the palace so efficiently. Marcus appeared suddenly in her line of sight, moving between two soldiers with impossible speed. She saw his armored fist connect with the first attacker's helmet, and the soldier crumpled to the ground. Before the second could react, Marcus had grabbed his weapon and twisted away, the metal crushing in his grip like soft clay. The soldier tried to retreat, but Marcus caught him by the arm and threw him against a crystal wall with enough force to crack the transparent surface. Princess Lyra blinked, certain she had misunderstood what she was seeing. No being could move that fast while wearing such heavy armor, and certainly no one could crush advanced weapons with their bare hands. The Keth used military-grade equipment that could withstand direct hits from energy weapons, yet Marcus was destroying it as if it were made of paper. More soldiers appeared, this time moving in a coordinated formation designed to surround and overwhelm a single target. They fired simultaneously from multiple angles, their energy beams converging on Marcus's position. The corridor filled with brilliant light as the weapons discharged, and Princess Lyra was forced to look away to protect her vision. When she looked back, she expected to see nothing but smoking armor plates scattered across the floor. Instead, Marcus was still standing, apparently unharmed. The energy beams had struck him directly, but instead of burning through his armor, they had simply dissipated against its surface like water hitting stone. Scorch marks covered the metal plates, but they appeared to be purely cosmetic damage. The Keth soldiers seemed as shocked as Princess Lyra felt. They fired again, pouring more energy into their attack. But the result was the same. Their weapons, which had easily penetrated the advanced shields used by palace security, were completely ineffective against Marcus's archaic-looking armor. Marcus began moving toward the soldiers, and Princess Lyra could hear the mechanical sounds of his suit changing again. The amber light she had noticed earlier shifted to red, and new sounds emerged from the armor, deeper, more powerful mechanical noises that seemed to indicate systems activating throughout the suit. What she had assumed was simple protective equipment was revealing itself to be something far more complex. One of the Keth soldiers produced a different type of weapon, something larger and more threatening than the standard energy rifles. The device hummed with power as it charged, and when it fired, the beam was thick enough to cut through the crystal walls like butter. The shot struck Marcus' center mass, and for a moment Princess Lyra thought she was about to witness his death. Instead, she watched him take a step forward against the beam, his armor absorbing the incredible energy output without apparent difficulty. The weapon that could slice through reinforced barriers was having no more effect than the smaller rifles had. Marcus reached the soldier firing it, placed one armored hand on the weapon, and crushed it completely. The energy discharge that resulted from the destruction lit up the entire corridor, but when the light faded, Marcus was unharmed while the soldier who had been holding the weapon was unconscious on the floor. The remaining attackers began to retreat, their disciplined military formation breaking down into panic flight. Princess Lyra heard them shouting to each other in their own language, and even without understanding the words, the fear in their voices was unmistakable. These were hardened soldiers who had conquered worlds, yet they were running from a single human in battered armor. Marcus did not pursue them immediately. Instead, he stopped in the middle of the corridor and began doing something that made Princess Lyra question her sanity. He started removing his armor, piece by piece, setting the plates aside with careful precision. She wanted to scream at him to stop, to tell him that removing the protection in the middle of a battle was suicide, but no sound would come from her throat. The other delegates crowded behind her, trying to see what was happening through the narrow gap. The Centauri representative pushed closer, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with confusion and fear. "What is he doing?" he whispered. "Without his armor, he will be defenseless." As each piece of armor came away, Princess Lyra expected to see the soft, vulnerable flesh that lay beneath the protective equipment of every species she knew. What she saw instead defied everything she thought she understood about biology and technology. Marcus's body was not the weak, unprotected form she had anticipated. His skin had a metallic sheen that reflected the emergency lighting, and when he moved, she could see patterns of circuitry running beneath the surface like veins of light. His muscles were defined beyond anything she had seen in any species, appearing dense and solid as stone, yet moving with perfect fluidity. But it was not just his appearance that shocked her. As he set aside the last piece of his armor, Marcus moved in ways that should have been impossible for any living being. He took a step forward, and the crystal floor cracked under his foot despite the fact that he was no longer wearing a heavy protective suit. When he raised his hand, she could see that his fingers ended in what looked like retractable claws made of the same metallic material as his skin. The retreating Keth soldiers had regrouped at the far end of the corridor, bringing heavier weapons to bear. They fired everything they had at the now in armor human, filling the passage with energy beams intense enough to melt through ship hulls. The barrage continued for nearly 30 seconds, turning the air itself into a furnace of destructive force. When the firing stopped and the energy dissipated, Marcus was still standing exactly where he had been. His skin glowed with absorbed heat, but he showed no signs of injury or even discomfort. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers as if testing their function, then looked up at the soldiers who had just emptied their weapons trying to kill him. What happened next would be burned into Princess Lyra's memory forever. Marcus simply started walking toward the Keth soldiers, his pace steady and unhurried. They fired at him again, but their weapons had no more effect on his unprotected body than they had on his armor. If anything, he seemed more resilient without the protective equipment. The first soldier he reached tried to use his rifle as a club, swinging it at Marcus's head with enough force to crush bone. Marcus caught the weapon in mid-swing, his fingers closing around the barrel and stopping the attack completely. The metal began to form under the pressure of his grip, and within seconds, the advanced military rifle had been crushed into an unrecognizable ball of twisted debris. The soldier who had been holding it stared in disbelief at the destruction of his weapon, then looked up at Marcus's face. For the first time, Princess Lyra could see the human's expression clearly without his helmet. His features were calm, almost serene, as if he were performing a routine task rather than fighting for his life. There was no anger, no rage, just professional competence applied to the business of combat. Marcus placed one hand on the soldier's chest and pushed gently. The armored warrior flew backward through the air, striking the wall with enough force to leave a crater in the crystal surface. The impact should have killed him, but Princess Lyra could see that he was still breathing. Marcus had calculated the force precisely to incapacitate, without causing permanent harm. The remaining soldiers broke and ran, abandoning their weapons and their mission in their haste to escape. Marcus watched them go without attempting to pursue, then began walking back toward the service passage where the delegates were hiding. As he moved, the glow in his skin began to fade, and the metallic sheen became less pronounced, as if his body were returning to a more normal state. He stopped outside the passage entrance and began putting his armor back on, piece by piece, with the same careful attention he had used when removing it. As each plate locked into place, the mechanical sounds resumed and the indicator lights returned to their steady blue glow. Within minutes, he looked exactly as he had before the fight began. A scarred and battered, archaic armor that had seen too many battles. Princess Lyra pulled back on the wall panel, her mind struggling to process what she had witnessed. The other delegates were asking questions, wanting to know what had happened, but she could not find words to describe it. How could she explain that the human she had mocked for his primitive equipment was something far beyond her understanding? Marcus's voice came through the passage entrance, calm and professional as always. The immediate threat has been cleared. We can proceed to the shelter now, but we need to move quickly. More hostiles are approaching from the lower levels. The delegates began moving through the passage, following his directions toward safety. Princess Lyra moved with them, but her eyes remained fixed on Marcus as he took his position at the rear of the group. His armor clinked and whirred with the same mechanical sounds as before, giving no indication of the incredible capabilities that lay beneath its scarred surface. As they walked through the maintenance tunnels toward the promised shelter, one question burned in her mind above all others. If this was what humanity looked like when they took off their armor, what were they really capable of when they stopped holding back? The emergency shelter was a reinforced chamber deep within the palace's foundation, designed to protect the royal family during attacks. Princess Lyra had never actually been inside it before, despite knowing of its existence her entire life. The thick walls were lined with materials that could withstand orbital bombardment, and the life support systems could keep dozens of people alive for weeks if necessary. As the group of delegates settled into cramped space, the reality of the situation began to sink in. They were trapped underground while hostile forces controlled the palace above them. Communication with the outside world was still impossible, and they had no way of knowing if rescue was coming or if the attack was part of a larger invasion. Marcus stood near the shelter's entrance, his armor once again making him appear to be nothing more than a guard in outdated equipment. The indicator lights on his suit had returned to their normal blue glow, and the mechanical sounds were back to their usual quiet hum. To anyone who had not witnessed what Princess Lyra had seen in the corridor, he would look exactly as he had during the diplomatic sessions, primitive and unremarkable. But Princess Lyra could not stop staring at him. Every time he moved, she found herself looking for signs of the incredible strength and speed he had displayed when fighting the Keth soldiers. The way he had crushed advanced weapons with his bare hands. The complete immunity to energy weapons that could cut through starship hulls. The casual way he had thrown armored soldiers through crystal walls. None of it seemed real in the quiet confines of the shelter. The other delegates were discussing their situation in hushed voices, trying to understand how the attack had succeeded so completely. The Centauri representative was particularly disturbed by the failure of their communication systems, while the Ridiculed kept muttering about the advanced technology the attackers had used. "I do not understand how they penetrated our defenses so easily," the Centauri said, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with agitation. "Our energy shields should have stopped their weapons, and our communication networks are supposed to be impossible to disrupt." "The Keth Collective has been acquiring new technology," the Ridiculed replied. "Intelligence reports suggest they have been reverse engineering equipment from multiple species and combining it in ways we did not anticipate." Princess Lyra listened to their conversation while continuing to watch Marcus. He seemed to be monitoring something on his wrist display, the crude holographic projection, showing tactical information about the palace and surrounding areas. Occasionally, he would tap commands into the device, and she wondered what kind of network he was accessing when everyone else's advanced systems had been compromised. After several minutes of observation, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She approached Marcus directly, ignoring concerned looks from her fellow delegates. When she was close enough to speak without being overheard by the others, she looked up at his helmeted face and asked a question that had been burning in her mind. "What are you?" Marcus turned to look at her, his visor reflecting the shelter's dim lighting. For a moment he said nothing, and she wondered if he was going to pretend not to understand her question. Then he reached up and touched something on his helmet, and the faceplate retracted with a soft mechanical sound. Without the helmet, Princess Lyra could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his 30s by human standards, with dark hair and intense eyes that seemed to take in everything around him simultaneously. His skin had the same subtle metallic sheen she had glimpsed during the fight, though it was much less pronounced now. "That is a complicated question," he said quietly. "What do you think I am?" Princess Lyra struggled to find words. Everything she had believed about humans, about biology, about the limitations of organic life, had been shattered by what she had witnessed. "I thought I was looking at a primitive species that had barely mastered space travel. But what I saw in that corridor was impossible according to everything I know about science." Marcus nodded slowly. "Your science is not wrong. It is just incomplete." He gestured to a corner of the shelter, where they could speak more privately. "What do you know about human history?" "Very little," Princess Lyra admitted. "The reports say your species achieved faster-than-light travel recently and joined the galactic community as one of the newer civilizations. Your technology appears to be several centuries behind most other species." "That is what we wanted everyone to believe," Marcus said. "The truth is more complex. Humanity did not develop space travel the same way other species did. We took a different path." He activated his wrist display, and the holographic projection changed to show what looked like a timeline. The images were simple compared to the advanced presentations other species used, but they told a story that Princess Lyra found both fascinating and terrifying. Most civilizations develop technology to overcome the limitations of their biology, Marcus explained. They build machines to be stronger, faster, more durable than their organic forms. Humans decided to improve the biology itself. The display showed images of human development over several centuries. Princess Lyra saw civilizations rising and falling, wars that consumed entire continents, and scientific discoveries that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. But instead of replacing their bodies with mechanical parts like other species had done, humans had found ways to enhance their natural capabilities. We call it biological optimization, Marcus continued. Every human alive today is the result of generations of careful genetic improvement, cybernetic integration, and cellular enhancement. What you saw in the corridor is not unusual by our standards. It is just what humans are capable of when we stop pretending to be weak. Princess Lyra stared at the crude holographic display, trying to understand the implications of what she was hearing. But your technology appears so primitive. Your weapons, your armor, your ships, they all look centuries behind what other species use. Marcus smiled, and she noticed that his teeth had the same metallic quality as his skin. That is because we do not need advanced technology the way other species do. When your body can withstand energy weapons, you do not need sophisticated shields. When you can run faster than most vehicles, you do not need advanced transportation. When you can process information at superhuman speeds, you do not need complex computers. He touched another control on his display, and the images changed to show human military forces. Princess Lyra saw soldiers who looked similar to Marcus, wearing armor that appeared basic and outdated but moved with the same fluid precision she had witnessed. Their weapons were simple kinetic devices rather than energy weapons, but the footage showed them being devastatingly effective against more advanced opponents. The armor I wear is not protection, Marcus said. It is a restraint system. It limits my strength and speed to levels that will not accidentally harm people around me. It also makes other species underestimate our capabilities, which can be tactically useful. Princess Lyra thought about all the times she had seen him move during the diplomatic sessions, the way his armor had clinked and whirred with mechanical sounds. Those sounds, the indicator lights, the way you move so carefully, it was all to make you appear primitive. Partly, Marcus agreed, but also because the restraint systems require constant calibration. Managing superhuman capabilities while maintaining the appearance of normalcy is more complex than you might think. The implications were staggering. If Marcus represented typical human capabilities, then humanity was not a primitive species struggling to keep up with galactic civilization. They were potentially the most advanced military force in known space, deliberately hiding their true nature behind a facade of technological backwardness. Why reveal this to me? Princess Lyra asked. Why not continue the deception? Marcus deactivated his display and looked directly at her, because the situation has changed. The Keth Collective's attack was not random, and it was not limited to this palace. While we have been trapped down here, they have launched coordinated strikes against multiple targets throughout Valerian space. Your empire is under invasion. Princess Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. How do you know this? Human intelligence networks are more extensive than most species realize, Marcus replied. We have been monitoring Keth activities for months. This summit was their primary target, but it was also a diversion. While your best ships and most experienced commanders were assigned to protect this gathering, Keth forces moved against your outer colonies and industrial centers. The full scope of the disaster began to dawn on her. The Valerian Empire's military strength was built around advanced technology and sophisticated defensive systems. If the Keth had found ways to counter those advantages, as they had demonstrated during the palace attack, then her people would be facing an enemy they were not prepared to fight. My father, the Emperor, he needs to know about this, she said urgently. The military commanders, the fleet admirals, they need to understand what they are facing. Your father is safe, Marcus assured her. Human forces extracted him and other key leaders when the attack began. They are currently aboard one of our ships in orbit. Princess Lyra stared at him in shock. Human forces were already here? How long have you been preparing for this? Long enough, Marcus said simply. We knew the Keth were planning something, but we needed them to reveal the full extent of their capabilities before we could respond effectively. Unfortunately, that meant allowing some damage to occur. She felt a surge of anger at the casual way he discussed the destruction of her world's defenses. You used us as bait. We protected what we could, Marcus replied calmly. But yes, sometimes difficult choices must be made for the greater good. If we had moved too early, the Keth would have retreated and tried again later when we were less prepared. The shelter's communication system suddenly activated, filling the chamber with the voice of a Valerian military officer. Emergency broadcast to all survivors. Keth forces are withdrawing from the palace. Repeat, hostiles are in retreat. Rescue teams are en route to all safe areas. Princess Lyra looked at Marcus with new understanding. They are retreating because of you, because of what humanity is really capable of. Marcus began putting his helmet back on, the faceplate sliding into place with the same soft mechanical sound. When he spoke again, his voice came through the suit speakers with their familiar electronic quality. The Keth Collective made the same mistake you did, Princess. They assumed that appearing primitive meant being weak. Now they are learning the difference between those two things. As rescue teams began opening the shelter's entrance, Princess Lyra realized that everything she thought she knew about the balance of power in the galaxy had just changed forever. 3 hours later, Princess Lyra stood on the bridge of a Valerian command ship, watching through the massive viewports as the space around her homeworld filled with vessels. The rescue from the palace had proceeded smoothly once the Keth forces began their retreat, but the true scope of the crisis was only now becoming clear as reports arrived from across the Empire. The holographic display in the center of the bridge showed a three-dimensional map of Valerian space, with red markers indicating systems under attack and blue ones showing areas still under government control. The red greatly outnumbered the blue, and more markers were changing color as each hour passed. The Keth Collective had struck with coordination and precision that exceeded even their most pessimistic intelligence estimates. Emperor Vex stood beside the tactical display, his normally composed features showing the strain of watching his empire crumble. Fleet Admiral Kane, the Empire's most experienced military commander, pointed to various sections of the map as he briefed the assembled staff. They hit 17 major systems simultaneously, the Admiral reported. Our defensive platforms were neutralized before they could respond effectively, and our communication networks are still compromised in most sectors. The Keth are using some kind of adaptive technology that learns from our countermeasures and modifies their approach in real time. Princess Lyra listened to the reports while keeping one eye on Marcus, who stood quietly near the rear of the bridge. He had been invited to observe the briefing as a representative of a human delegation, though most of the Valerian officers still treated him as an irrelevant observer from a primitive species. They had no idea that he probably understood their tactical situation better than they did. What about our reserve fleets? Emperor Vex asked. Surely we have sufficient forces to mount a counterattack. Admiral Kane's expression grew even more grim. The reserves are engaged in offensive actions throughout the Outer Rim. Every time we concentrate forces for an offensive, the Keth strikes somewhere else. They seem to know our fleet movements before we make them. The tactical situation was clearly hopeless using conventional Valerian strategy. Their advanced technology, which had always been their greatest strength, was being systematically countered by an enemy that had studied their methods and found ways to neutralize every advantage. The empire that had dominated this sector of space for centuries was being outfought by what had been considered a minor militant organization just days before. Princess Lyra watched the display as more systems changed from blue to red. At this rate, the core worlds would be under attack within a matter of days, and the Empire's government would be forced to surrender or face total destruction. She thought about what Marcus had told her in the shelter about humanity's true capabilities, and made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. "Father," she said, stepping forward, "I request permission to consult with our human allies about possible strategic alternatives." The bridge fell silent. Every officer present turned to look at her with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed contempt. Admiral Kane was the first to speak. "Your Highness, with respect, I do not think a species that has barely achieved interstellar flight can offer meaningful advice about military strategy at this scale. Princess Lyra looked at Marcus, who remained motionless near the back of the bridge. His helmet was in place, making him appear to be nothing more than a ceremonial guard in archaic armor. But she could see the indicator lights on his suit, and she noticed they had changed from their usual blue to the amber pattern she remembered from the palace corridor. Perhaps we should not be so quick to dismiss their perspective, she said carefully. After all, they did manage to evacuate key personnel from the palace when our own security forces failed. Emperor Vex studied his daughter's face, recognizing something in her expression that suggested she knew more than she was saying. Very well. What do our human friends suggest? Marcus stepped forward, his armor making the familiar mechanical sounds that everyone on the bridge had learned to associate with primitive technology. When he spoke, his voice carried the same calm professionalism it always had. But Princess Lyra could hear undertones that the others missed. With your permission, I would like to contact our fleet commanders, Marcus said. They may have tactical insights that could be useful in your current situation. Admiral Kane looked skeptical. Your fleet? Intelligence reports indicate that humanity has perhaps a dozen interstellar vessels, mostly converted cargo ships with basic defensive armaments. Marcus activated his wrist display, the crude holographic interface appearing to confirm everything the Admiral had said about human technological limitations. Our fleet composition is somewhat different than your intelligence suggests, he said simply. The display connected to something, and suddenly the bridge's main tactical screen changed. Instead of showing only Valerian and Keth forces, new contacts appeared throughout the system. Dozens of ships that had apparently been present but undetected by the Empire's most advanced sensors. The vessels were smaller than typical warships, with designs that looked functional rather than elegant, but there were far more of them than anyone had expected. How long have your ships been in our space? Emperor Vex demanded. Approximately 6 months, Marcus replied. We have been monitoring Keth activities and positioning assets to respond when they made their move. Admiral Kane studied the new tactical display with growing amazement. The human ships had somehow avoided detection by sensor networks that could track objects the size of asteroids across multiple star systems. Either their stealth technology was far more advanced than anyone suspected, or the ships themselves were built using principles that Valerian science did not understand. Why did you not inform us of your presence? The Admiral asked. Because you would have asked us to leave, Marcus said. Your government made it clear that large foreign military forces were not welcome in Valerian space. We chose to maintain operational security rather than engage in lengthy diplomatic negotiations. Princess Lyra watched the tactical display as more human contacts appeared, not just in the current system, but throughout Valerian space. The scope of their deployment was staggering. They had positioned forces near every major Keth target, apparently anticipating an invasion with precision that seemed impossible. What are you proposing? Emperor Vex asked. Marcus touched something on his wrist display, and the bridge's communication system activated. A new voice filled the space, speaking an accented galactic standard that identified the speaker as human. This is Admiral Chun of the Terran Defense Force. The voice said, We are prepared to engage Keth forces throughout the sector, but we will need your government's official authorization to operate in Valerian space. Admiral Kane looked at the tactical display, showing human forces that outnumbered anything in the official intelligence reports. What exactly are you offering? Complete elimination of Keth military capability. Admiral Chin replied without hesitation. We estimate the operation will take approximately 18 hours once authorization is received. The bridge fell silent again. Princess Lyra could see the disbelief on every face around her. The idea that a species considered technologically primitive could accomplish in 18 hours what the Valerian Empire's advanced military could not do at all seemed absurd. That is impossible, Admiral Kane said finally. The Keth have superior numbers and technology that can counter our best offensive systems. They have superior numbers and technology compared to conventional forces. Admiral Chin agreed, but humans do not fight conventionally. Marcus stepped closer to the main display and activated something on his armor. The indicator light shifted from amber to red, and Princess Lyra heard the deeper mechanical sound she remembered from the palace corridor. Around the bridge, The Valerian officers watched with growing confusion as the human guard's equipment began displaying capabilities they had never seen before. "Admiral Kane," Marcus said, his voice carrying new authority, "what you are seeing on this display represents less than 10% of human military capability. We have been operating under severe restraints to avoid alarming other species. The Keth Collective has forced us to reconsider those limitations." The tactical display changed again, showing detailed schematics of Keth weapons and defensive systems. The information was more complete than anything Valerian intelligence had gathered, suggesting that human surveillance capabilities were far beyond what anyone had suspected. "We have been studying Keth technology for over a year," Marcus continued. "We know the capabilities and limitations of every ship in their fleet. More importantly, we understand their strategic thinking and can predict their responses to various tactical situations." Admiral Chen's voice returned through the communication system. "Your Majesty, the choice is yours. You can continue fighting the Keth using conventional methods and face the complete destruction of your empire, or you can authorize human forces to resolve the situation using our methods." Emperor Vex looked around the bridge at his advisors and military commanders. Princess Lyra could see the struggle in his face as he weighed the humiliation of accepting help from a supposedly primitive species against the alternative of watching his civilization fall. "What assurance do we have that your forces will respect Valerian sovereignty once the Keth are defeated?" he asked. "You have our word," Admiral Chen replied. "Humanity has no territorial ambitions in this sector. We simply want to eliminate a threat that has become too dangerous to ignore." Princess Lyra stepped forward again. "Father, I have seen what humans are capable when they stop holding back. I believe we should trust them." The Emperor studied his daughter's face, seeing conviction that had not been there before the attack on the palace. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "Very well. You have authorization to engage Keth forces in Valerian space." Marcus touched his wrist, display one final time. "Authorization confirmed. All human forces are cleared to engage." Princess Lyra watched the tactical display as human ships throughout the sector began moving with coordinated precision. What happened over the next 18 hours would forever change how she thought about strength technology and the true meaning of evolution. By the time it was over, she would understand that humanity had not joined the galactic community as a junior member learning from more advanced species. They had been quietly studying everyone else, waiting for the right moment to reveal that the students had become the teachers. The Keth Collective was about to learn what happened when someone made the mistake of threatening something that humans had decided to protect.